Hadirin yang terhormat, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Di Tempo BNI The Bilateral Forum 2022, supported by East Ventures. In the first session, there was a discussion about the role of SMEs for economic development. SME sales shrink more and drain in cash during the pandemic. And as the number of COVID-19 cases are decreasing, we can move more freely, and I think economy slowly is growing. So what kind of strategies that should be taken and should be prepared? We will find the answer in our discussion now, economic recovery in aftermath of the pandemic. To start this discussion, let me re-invite our moderator for this session, Mr. Wahyu Diatmika, Director of Tempo.co. Please give big round of applause. Mr. Wahyu, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Tempo BNI Bilateral Forum, Economic Recovery in the Aftermath of the Pandemic. I would like to ask your permission to open my mask. I already received the booster vaccine, so I guess all of us quite safe now. This is the first major events that are organized by Tempo in the last 2 years, so it's been a really exciting experience to have you and welcome you all in this forum. I would like to invite the distinguished speakers that already are with us today. First, I would like to invite Professor Suhasil Nazara, SA, MSc, PhD, Deputy Minister of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. Pak Suhasil, terima kasih banyak sudah hadir. And then secondly, Ambassador Sung Kim, the US Ambassador for the Republic of Indonesia. Thank you so much for making the time. And then Ibu Ina Lepel, Ambassador of the Republic of Germany to Indonesia. Ibu Satu Kahkonen, the World Bank Country Director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. Representing local government, Bapak Firman Hamid Pajara, Head of Regional Revenue Department, the City of Makassar. And from the private sector, we have Bapak David Fernando Audi, Operating Partner of East Venture, a leading venture capital firm in the region. Terima kasih Pak Audi, Pak David. So in the next 1.5 hours until 3 p.m., we're going to have hopefully a very fruitful discussion on this topic. Let me just first frame the discussion for the audience and for all the speakers. We know all the data, we know the trend that since the slowdown of the infection rate of COVID-19 in Indonesia, we have seen an uptick of the economic growth. The first quarter of 2022 have shown a very promising result, the 5.01% of growth. Straight growth in the last 4 quarters. But then what do we need to do next? We have identified the problem from all of the speakers. What we need is your insights, your analysis, your perspective on how do we go from here? What are the needs to have to make the recovery more sustainable in the future? This forum is designed as a conversation and a dialogue, and that's why we have officials from Indonesia and also our friends and colleagues from abroad from the US and from Germany and also the World Bank to have a conversational dialogue and a shared learning from each other experience. And also the local governments and the private sectors also presented, so we can all have an inclusive dialogue on this topic. So first we're going to have remarks from each of the speakers, approximately 5 to 7 minutes. Each speaker will give his and her take on the issue. Then we'll have Q&A. I'm going to elaborate some of the topics that you presented. Ya Pak, langsung ke Pak Suhasil setelah ini. Then we open it for the audience. We're going to start with Pak Suhasil. You can take the stage. The floor is yours.
Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Pak Wahyu. All of the speakers, I'm sorry that I'm here. I hope you're okay, Bu Satu. Colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to be here, and I'll try to explain to you very brief about what is the government take on the current situation, the aftermath of the pandemic, just like the topic of this second session this afternoon. Let me start on the onset about what have we done in the last 2 years and a half. Pandemic, COVID, no medicine. In the very beginning, no vaccines. So the only way to save people's life is to restrict mobility. In that sense, all consumptions go down, all investments go down, people do not move everywhere, so economic activity was basically halted. Economic growth was basically going down to the negative side. I think it's you see the numbers, just like Pak Wahyu mentioned. If you look at my presentation, numbers, I believe, are all there. But we had time in 2020 where the economic was actually contracting, minus 2.07%. And during that time, if you look at the data, you will see that the government consumption is the only positive economic growth for the economy. And it's not only happening in Indonesia, it's happening everywhere in the world. Government consumption, government budget is the source of economic growth. How can we do that? We can only do that because we expanded our deficits. Meaning we expand our spending, meaning we expand our debt. So the government consumption is still positive. Government consumption is at the forefront of handling the pandemic. But of course, that situation, high deficits, high spending, cannot take place forever. At some point, the government must be able to what we call the consolidate the fiscal and the economic growth in the aftermath of the pandemic should come back to the consumption. The source of economic growth should come back to the investment. We have to bring in consumption, we have to bring in investment again. That's what should happen in the aftermath of pandemic. I'm very happy to see all of you in the same room. I believe it's more than 100 people in this room, which means consumption is back on the saddle. It's good to see this, right? Now, but 2 years of the pandemic has already distracted our supply chains. Has already distracted. It's not easy for stores to reopen and then stock up all of the merchandise in 1 month. It's not easy. It's not easy for the restaurants to suddenly reopen and then accept like 100% capacity. It's not easy. There is a supply side restriction. In the economic literature, we start to talk about the scaring effect. Because we have been closed, we have been closed for more than 2 years, the scars are there. It is very important that we heal the scars and get back to the supply get rid of the supply constraints. Now, while the supply constraint is still there and the demand, like you all are now, we really like to go to the mall, we really like to go to the restaurant. It's very hard to get the reservation in restaurants in Jakarta area. I believe some of you must have already felt that. What's going to happen if the supply is limited and the demand is up? What's going to happen is the price is going up, i.e. inflation. Inflation is a feature of recovery, the early recovery. Inflation is the feature of early recovery. Prices are going up. We understand that. And for Indonesia, we are ready with we anticipating the inflation. Okay, but all of a sudden in February, Russia and Ukraine went into war. What we anticipated as a price increase, which is gonna be in the beginning of the recovery, is kind of top up with the price increase because of the global supply chains and global tension. Now, what should we do? What should we do? What is the logic of the government in handling this situation? Number one, the recovery must continue. That means we're still going to encourage people to consume, consumption must increase, investment must increase, export and import must also increase. We are happy that the international commodity prices benefiting Indonesia's export, but we also know that it's very important to increase the consumption and increase the investment for Indonesia. So that is number one. And we are very happy to see that in the first quarter of 2022 this year, the economic growth was 5.01%, and you see the consumption is positive, investment is positive. And actually, the one that is negative is the government consumption. The government consumption is negative. Why is that? I can tell you that is because parts of our budget is in the consolidation mode. What does it mean, consolidation mode? Ladies and gentlemen, the budget has been working very hard, spending so much money, printing a lot of debt paper, and we have to tame it down now. We have to reduce it now. Why? Because the budget must come back to its health. Why the budget must come back to its health? Why not just increase the debt burden? No, the budget must back to its health because the budget must stand ready if anything happens to the pandemic again. We must stand ready. And the only way to do that is that whenever we have a breathing space, we use the breathing space. Does it mean that the government budget going to be negative to the economic growth all year long? No. It doesn't mean that way. But the government will continue to use the budget as a tool that is flexible, anticipative, and responsive to the pandemic. Is the pandemic coming back, Pak? We don't know. What we know is that the virus is still out there. That's what we know. The virus is not on its way out. The virus is still there. We continue our economic interactions, economic life, but we must stand ready. So, what we're going to see, I'll close down with what are we going to see this year? What we are going to see is that economic growth is going back. Last year we grew at 3.7%. This year we hope we're going to have 5.0%. economic growth between 5.0 to 5.2 if everything is good. So economic growth is going to increase compared to last year. Inflation going to increase. It's going to increase. So don't worry about inflation. Last year, slightly less than 2%. This year going to be like between 2 to 4%. But the international oil prices is increasing. Is it going to be translated to Indonesia? It's a good question. It's a good question. We should have adjusted the energy prices, but we haven't done so. If we do not adjust our energy prices, that means somebody has to pay. And who's going to pay it? At this time, the government is still paying it. It's still paying for the energy subsidy. Is the government going to shift this burden to the people? It's very important to look at the speed of recovery. Anything that the government do should maintain the path for recovery. But we are very happy that this year, we believe that our fiscal condition is going to be continue to be strong. Next year, we will report to the media about the April implementation of our budget. It's going to be still solid, but we know that the international oil price increase is going to be very challenging for all of us. But all in all, we hope that the next year will be better than this year, but under one condition. We continue to maintain the health protocols, we continue to maintain the healthiness of the economy, and we continue to maintain the importance of our health sector. So at some point, we have to talk about how can we have our health sector continue to be ready? What does it mean to have a standby and ready health sectors for Indonesia? I'll stop here. I'm very sorry that I have to leave at 2 o'clock, but then I will stay until around 2 o'clock, around 2 o'clock here, but to let other panelists to have a chance to speak, let me stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. It's a very thorough and comprehensive explanation of what the policy course that the Indonesian government is going to take. I don't envy your position. It's very delicate and uncertain times. But before we elaborate on Pak Suhasil remarks, we have Ambassador Kim. The floor is yours. You have 5 to 7 minutes to share your remarks.
After the challenges of the last 2 years, it seems surreal not only to be gathering here in person, but that we have actually reached the time where we can actually talk about the pandemic's aftermath. It is true that we might encounter another COVID variant or subvariant or an occasional surge in case numbers, but the challenges that we have already faced have made us stronger, and now we can actually look forward. That Indonesia has come this far, this fast, is a testament to its leadership, its people, and to the power of international cooperation. I'm proud of the leading role that the United States has played and continues to play globally in making life-saving vaccines available to everyone, both bilaterally and through COVAX. And when we talk about the road ahead to economic recovery, vaccines and health issues are, I think, the right place to start. COVID-19 will not be the last or the biggest global health threat we face, so we must invest in the resilience of our global health infrastructure. That includes ensuring sustainable financing for pandemic preparedness and response. We commend Indonesia for using its leadership of the G20 this year to move us forward in this area. The US supports G20, Indonesia's G20 prioritization of global health architecture. President Biden has requested over $28 billion in the next national budget be directed towards global health, health systems, and health security. This will help us be better prepared for the next health shock. Governments, of course, have an important role in recovery from the pandemic. For the US, the American Rescue Plan played a central role in driving strong growth through 2021, with the US real GDP growth outpacing other developed economies and our labor market recovering faster. All through Delta and Omicron, and now a global supply shock due to Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine, the rescue plan has protected us against uncertainty and allowed our economy to face unknown risks from a position of strength. As we emerge from the pandemic, it is now evident that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has again redrawn the contours of the world economic outlook. This war is negatively impacting countries around the globe, Indonesia included, due to the contraction of Ukrainian and Russian exports, particularly energy, food, fertilizer, and other commodities. In the end, of course, Russia will suffer the most, surrendering its status as a major economy and experiencing a negative impact that will only compound over time. But that is the unfortunate results of starting a war that threatens the very foundations of peace and stability. Looking forward, I believe our collective planning for a successful economic recovery must also address two trends that have been in plain sight for some time: climate change and digital transition. Over the next decades, economic competitiveness will largely depend on how countries approach their digital sectors and the coming energy and climate transition, and how well they harness them to provide shared economic growth. US companies are leaders in these areas, and the US is excited to work with Indonesia to facilitate progress. Renewables are the future, from electric vehicles to solar power. Making the reforms necessary for that to happen puts every economy in a strong position for a suitable future. Recently, our Treasury Secretary Yellen discussed with Indonesia the potential for an accelerated transition away from coal in Indonesia's power sector and the potential for a just energy transition partnership, a model that aims to aggregate donor country, multilateral development banks, philanthropic, and private sector resources to support that transition. Through a just energy transition partnership, Indonesia and an international partnership group would work together to speed coal-fired generation decommissioning and expedite the deployment of renewable energy while also supporting those workers and communities who are most vulnerable to the energy transition. As our two nations continue our close collaboration to respond to the climate crisis, the business community is a key driver, looking at ways to achieve zero emissions itself and providing innovation and creative solutions. US and Indonesia are also natural partners to build robust digital economies. We're committed to supporting Indonesia's fast-growing digital economy. Recent investments from US companies in cloud computing, digital skills training demonstrate the US private sector's competitive advantages and its ability to create high-quality jobs to strengthen Indonesia's human capital development. We stand behind policies that promote innovation and ensure market access for foreign firms. Interventionist policies, including local content requirements and restrictions on cross-border data flows, could undermine digital economic growth. As you know, at the US-ASEAN Special Summit in Washington, President Biden will welcome President Jokowi and other ASEAN leaders to discuss intensifying cooperation in several key areas and how the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Initiative would deepen economic relations overall. This economic framework will address the breadth of our economic cooperation, including fair trade, supply chain resilience, infrastructure, and support for small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as clean energy and digital technology. We hope Indonesia will decide to join this important framework with the US and other regional partners in the coming weeks. I mentioned US companies a moment ago, and now I would like to touch on the importance of private sector-led investment. The US believes that infrastructure investment by a responsible, market-driven private sector, paired with high standards and transparency in public funding, is crucial to achieving long-run effectiveness and sustainability. That said, governments can and must play an appropriate role in coordinating and mobilizing private sector investment. That's why President Biden and our G7 partners are leading a values-driven, high-standard, and transparent infrastructure partnership led by major democracies to help address the immense infrastructure needs in developing countries. This effort is mobilizing private sector capital in very areas I mentioned earlier: climate, health and health security, digital technology, as well as gender equality and equity. With catalytic investments from our respective development finance institutions, this represents a unified vision for global infrastructure development. As a lead partner, the U.S. is mobilizing our Development Finance Corporation, USAID, Exim Bank, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. In doing so, the Biden administration is creating a global complement to our domestic infrastructure investments in the American Jobs Plan, which has been key to our success at home. So the roadmap is clear. We believe that those countries that plan well and adhere to principles of sustainability and transparency will be the countries that prosper. With Indonesia hosting this year's G20 and the US hosting next year's Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, as we say in America, the ball is very much in our two countries' courts. Before closing, I want to mention that the US is now the fourth largest foreign investor in Indonesia, rising 4 spots from last year. And our two-way trade in goods increased last year by over 30% to $36 billion. That is good news for both the US and Indonesia. But better yet, as the world's third and fourth largest populations, our bilateral trade and investment still has enormous potential for growth. And we know exactly how to fulfill that potential. We believe with continued Indonesian leadership to ease licensing requirements, enforce intellectual property rights, and allow cross-border data flows, private sector expertise and resources from the US and other responsible economies will increase trade and help unlock Indonesia's economic future in healthcare, renewable energy, and digital economy. We expect to convene the US-Indonesia Trade and Investment Framework Agreement meeting soon, chaired at the ministerial level for the first time in many years, to further expand bilateral trade and investment. And we look forward to working together to advance our core priorities on our trade agenda, including elevating labor and environmental standards and improving market access. So the US vision for this region is one that is free and open, connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. This vision aligns with the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This vision will mean prosperity for the 1.5 billion people in the region due to join the global middle class this decade. And it is a vision the United States looks forward to working towards with Indonesia in the coming months, years, and decades to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Kim. I think there's a very detailed list of opportunities and also already cooperation being done between Indonesia and Australia. I underline some of the few sectors that was mentioned: digital economy, partnership in building more robust health infrastructure, and also that the need to boost the private sector, making it more resilient in the future. Unfortunately, Pak Suhasil is have to leave us at 2:00, but I would like to have everyone to take a group photo before you left, Pak Suhasil. Is it okay? And then we can continue with the next speaker because we don't want to miss this opportunity with all the speakers still complete. If you may, please stand up and we'll take a group picture. Di sini aja, Pak. Terima kasih Pak Suhasil. Okay. Then let's continue with the next speaker. We still have the next one is Her Excellency Bu Ina Lepel, the Ambassador of the German Republic for Indonesia.
Selamat siang semua. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here in person and in the same room with all of you. And so I find this subject of how we have overcome or are trying to struggle with the pandemic is because it's not over, really very fascinating and timely. In order to draw first impressions and lessons from the German experience, I think we need to look at different phases and different challenges. Because when the pandemic first started, we were in a very similar situation as the Vice Minister just pointed out about Indonesia. We had no vaccines. We were struggling to get certain supplies like protective personal equipment or even masks. People went to sewing their own masks in garages. And so the only way was to limit mobility rapidly, which of course has huge economic cost. And we were lucky in the sense that we had a lot of fiscal space, hard won through consolidating when the years had been better. And we were also beginning in that time to discover the problem of supply chain dependencies, because especially these masks and certain medications, we only had one source. And that already we were discovering was not such a good idea. Then in the second half of 2020, we were already beginning to think about recovery because the numbers were going down. In Europe, especially in Germany, the pandemic is very much a seasonal thing, and we do tend to have fewer cases in summer than in winter. So there was widespread optimism. Germany had the presidency of the European Union. So we worked within the European Union for a big package of recovery. And since everybody recognized that this disruption caused by the pandemic was also an opportunity, there was a lot of consensus for really using this as a chance to recover greener, recover more digital, more modern. And the EU came up with a package of 750 billion euro to be spent over 5 years. Part of it actually financed jointly, which was something Germany had not been very happy to do before within the European Union, because the German taxpayers are not happy having to guarantee for debts of other countries. But in this moment of crisis, the realization was that either we get through this together or we don't. So I think one of the lessons already is solidarity is really key. Then in early 2021, vaccines were slowly coming online. Many people were thinking that now we're really on the way to be safe. Let's just get everybody vaccinated and then we can really focus on recovery. But the rollout was slower than it had been hoped for. And we in Germany discovered quite a few issues in our setup, in our administration. There were online solutions for booking appointments, but the priority people to receive vaccinations were the 70 or 80 plus people who are not so digital native and really were struggling to use these electronic methods. So we realized that we do have some issues of flexibility and being really service-oriented to the people. But at least then it did become more workable, and the summer of that year was also okay. So there was thinking of even more recovery, and the economy was actually really picking up, which immediately caused problems of inflation, because there were lots of recovery effects with companies now buying more on the market, wanting to invest. We were facing serious shortages of building material, of really lots of things. And then on top of that, we also had the Delta wave, and then later the Omicron. So for that winter, we were once again in a quasi-lockdown situation. Plus, we had a totally unexpected problem, the anti-vaxxers, which I must say, Indonesia is really lucky that you people are a lot more pragmatic, and I had the impression Indonesians are very happy to have the possibility to get vaccinated. But in Germany, unfortunately, at some point, the vaccination campaign just ground to a halt, because there is a stubborn percentage of 20 to 25% that just believe vaccination is somehow not good for them. And so we still don't have the degree of immunity we would have liked to have. Still, from early 2022, things were still starting to look better and more optimistic. But then on February 24, there was, as was mentioned before, the totally unprovoked invasion of Russia into Ukraine, in totally unacceptable breach of international order, causing unspeakable suffering to the civilian population. Our minister just visited Kiev 2 days ago, was devastating by the suffering she saw, but also inspired by the courage of the defenders, and made a strong case that there has to be accountability for crimes that happen. From here, this conflict may seem far away, but this military attack is also an attack on the way nations have agreed to live together. And I think no country in the world can accept an invasion of a peaceful neighboring country with an attempt to change international borders. So we are grateful that Indonesia is among the large majority of countries that clearly names and opposes this aggression in important United Nations resolutions. And as has been said, this aggression has also had global consequences, in particular for food and energy security, which is hitting everybody, but particularly countries in the global south that are still struggling with the after effects of the pandemic. And of course, in other countries as well, we already had this post-pandemic inflation, and now this has become a lot worse. In Germany, we just counted 7.4%, which is really unusual. We have not had that kind of inflation in 40 years. So citizens are really quite concerned. On the brighter side, I must say that all these global developments, the pandemic and also the disruptions caused by the invasion, have also shifted our conversation with Indonesia even more than it was on the global issues. Because we consider Indonesia as a global partner of Germany, where we also don't just talk about where we can enhance our bilateral relations, but also discuss how can we get out of the pandemic, how can we jointly work for sustainable recovery, how can we improve digitization, and of course, how can we protect the planet's climate, which is the mega crisis looming large beyond all the others we are facing. And since we just had our, just yesterday to prove how important this is to us, we had our special envoy for international climate action, Jennifer Morgan, here in Indonesia for talks about how we can work more closely together on international climate action. The new German government, I forgot to mention that we had elections last September and had a new government from December. We have a strong focus on the whole green agenda, like decarbonization, energy transition, preservation of biodiversity. And so this was a successful first visit. We were impressed with Indonesia's efforts in this field and ready to support. The green agenda has been a priority in our cooperation for many years already, though. We have public sector investment, lending, and technical assistance worth €2 billion in the energy sector, with a strong focus on renewables, including pilot projects in the geothermal, in hydropower, and solar. We have also worked and are working on grid improvement, consultancy, and sharing of experience on regulatory frameworks, like, for instance, carbon pricing. So we are using a comprehensive approach. And I think that meshes very well with what my American colleague said about partnership and working together between the major partners and Indonesia on a just energy transition, where decarbonization, especially in the energy sector, will hopefully move forward. Another important initiative of cooperation in the green sector is the bilateral Green Infrastructure Initiative, where around 40 trillion Indonesian rupiahs have been programmed until 2025 for municipal green solutions like public transport, wastewater management, circular economy, waste management. And of course, for us as well, the private sector can play an important role. In this field, some larger companies are looking at development of batteries or production of batteries. We just had an SME coming in to open an office to look at renewable energy investment potential. And we have a big German company in waste management that is exploring potential in big Indonesian cities. So there is huge potential there. And I suppose that once the regulatory framework, especially on renewable energy, in particular tariff systems and local content regulations, become clearer, Indonesia will become even more attractive. So I think we will be able to discuss all the other points on the panel. For now, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to exchanging views with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Leppel. I think what I really like from your remarks is how you frame the tagline for Indonesia presidency, recover stronger, recover together, with another line, but also with similar spirit, recover greener, recover digitally. I think that's two topics that also mentioned by Ambassador Kim, the two trends, climate change and energy transition. I think that will really influence what will happen in the next few years to come. We'll elaborate on that in the next session. And also, ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions in mind, please keep it, and we'll have a chance for you to ask the questions in the last session. Now let's move on to the next speakers. We have Ibu Satu Kakonen, the World Bank Country Director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. The floor is yours.
Selamat siang, assalamualaikum. I'm very delighted to be here this afternoon, and can I have my slides, please? I'm a macroeconomist like Vice Minister Sua, and as you saw, Vice Minister Sua had slides, and I have slides. You know, macroeconomists can't live without showing some graphs to the people. So I hope that you will be able to put them up. I'm going to shift gear. Can you go to the next slide, please? I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I was asked to talk about global economic recovery. And then at the end, I'm also mentioning how this links with Indonesia. But the global economic recovery is facing significant headwinds due to various global challenges. And I'm going to talk today about some of the global challenges that are weighing down significantly economic recovery in the world. And the first and the key one is the increase in public and private debt to record levels in the world. And basically this increase in debt was very much accelerated by extraordinary fiscal and financial support during the pandemic, for obvious reasons. But as a result, many countries in the world are now facing a so-called debt overhang. What does it mean? It means that the large debt burden is preventing these countries to do additional borrowing to finance investments. And that's simply because the growth prospects for these countries are very weak. The second challenge is that the growth recovery is challenged by rising inflationary pressures. And thirdly, the pandemic has been globally a great unequalizer. So what we are seeing now worldwide is that there's an increasing inequality across the countries as well as within countries. And that is also adversely impacting economic recovery. And I'm going to come back to all of these global challenges very quickly. Next slide, please. So let's start with debt. I mean, the past decade has seen a very rapid rise in debt. In 2020, the total global debt reached 263% of global GDP. It's very high. It's the highest level in 50 years. And the challenge is that at the same time, this high debt has been accompanied by low investment and falling productivity growth. And this combination has very much created concerns about the global economic recovery. And the rise in public debt in emerging markets and developing economies, which is shown in the first figure that you see on the screen, is of particular concern. Why is it a concern? It is a concern because developing countries are now burdened with high debt and tightening financial conditions. Because the developed countries are normalizing their monetary policies. And the normalization of monetary policies means that basically the financing costs are rising very rapidly for the developing countries. And what we see that in some countries, this combination of high debt, low growth, and rising financing costs is already driving some countries to default or close to default. And let me just mention two countries, Sri Lanka and Argentina. We already know what's happening there. But in other countries, the collective global effort, through, for example, the debt service suspension initiatives that the G20 has championed, has actually kept the countries afloat. Now, in addition to the public debt, the private debt has also rapidly increased. And you can see that in the second figure on the screen. And going forward, this will have implications for the bank's asset quality. And therefore, strengthening now domestic corporate debt resolution frameworks becomes very important. Next slide, please. Now, so these debt high levels, they are coming in the context of challenging global growth conditions. Even before the start of the war in Ukraine, global growth was projected to fall sharply in this year. Advanced economies were still expected to return to the pre-pandemic growth levels by 2023, as is shown in the first chart. But since the start of the war in Ukraine, the global economy has experienced increasing energy and food prices, rapidly falling economic sentiments, and declining global economic expectations. And as a result, what we are now seeing is that the global growth prospects have significantly dimmed. So we can't expect the global economy to recover the way we still expected in January. And all this has translated into a much more challenging environment for investment outlook. And that is shown in the second figure over there. The investment levels will remain below pre-pandemic levels in this year, and also expected to remain so most likely in a couple of years to come. Now, what is important to note that there is divergence between, among emerging economies and developing economies. The economic activity has slowed significantly in countries that are commodity importers. And those countries have also faced significantly costly financing. But the economic activity in commodity exporters has remained buoyant. And Indonesia is luckily a commodity exporter. So Indonesia is not being hit the same way as other countries. Next slide, please. Now, global prospects are also weighed down by high inflation. Price pressures accelerated already last year as the recovery started. In developed countries, increasing demand, private demand, was driving inflation. But in emerging markets and developing economies, it was primarily the supply side constraints that were rising the prices up. And inflation has obviously become an even bigger challenge since the start of the war in Ukraine. And this you can see in the first chart. You see how the commodity prices shot up after the war started. And most commodity prices are expected to remain elevated in the next couple of years. Energy prices are forecast to rise by 50% in this year, and non-energy prices by 20%, before falling some next year. But some permanent increase in commodity prices can be expected going forward. And I'm saying that because over the past 50 years, the average commodity price cycle has been about 6 years. And what we have observed is that for all commodity groups, the average price increase during booms has been larger than the average price decline during busts. So that means that we can expect some commodity price stickiness going forward. Again, it will help Indonesia at some level, given that you are a commodity exporter. Next slide, please. And that is bringing me to the final challenge, which is rising inequality. Now, global inequality fell significantly during the decades before the pandemic. But unfortunately, pandemic has reversed partly that trend. Unlike the global financial crisis in 2007-2009, the pandemic has substantially raised the inequality between countries, the income inequality between the countries. And that you can see in the first figure. And at the same time, the within-country inequality is estimated to have increased. And that you can see in the second figure. And the poor and the vulnerable are the ones that have been affected most. It's women, low-skilled workers, and informal workers that have been hit hardest. And that's illustrated in the third figure on the slide. And all these trends together, they have raised the risks of inequality rising even more over the longer run. And frankly, what has happened on the education side is not helping. The disruptions to education are likely to only worsen the situation. And the last figure on this slide is showing that in low-income countries, only 39% of households with school-aged children are saying that their children engaged in any learning or education activity during school closures. That is dismal. And that means that going forward, we can see also widening inequality simply because of that. Last slide, please. Okay, so challenging situation, a lot of global challenges and issues. And this is in particular an issue for policymakers, because policymaking in this environment is not easy. So, and these are so big challenges that they require really sound policy response, and they also require global collective action. No country alone will be able to address all of these issues. So what could be done? I'm going to provide you one set of recommendations for countries, and another one I'm going to tell what the World Bank is going to do or doing to help. And let me first provide 4 recommendations for a sound policy mix at the country level. The first recommendation is prioritize fiscal support to the poor who are affected by high prices. They are the ones who will need support to survive these challenging times. Second, in countries with high debt, create fiscal space, create room to respond with fiscal policy through restructuring debt, restructuring public debt. Third, and this is important, maintain an open trade regime and avoid export restrictions. There is a temptation to do that when things go tough, but the consequences of that can actually be quite dire. Let me give an example. Export restrictions introduced during 2010 and 11, when there was a food price spike, they accounted for 40% of the increase in the world price of wheat and 1/4 of the increase in the world price of maize. And as a result of these price increases, 8.3 million people were tipped into extreme poverty. That could have been prevented, number would have been lower, had the international trade been open. So let's not repeat that episode. And the 4th and final recommendation links basically to structural reform. Since the fiscal and monetary policy space has been more or less exhausted in many countries because of high debt, there's now time to use structural reforms to accelerate growth. They don't cost anything except perhaps political cost, but they can be a very effective tool to facilitate economic activity and growth. So those are the in-country recommendations. But what is then the World Bank doing to help? Obviously, we are working with countries at the country level, including in Indonesia. We have actually been working with the government, even during the pandemic, talking about economic recovery and what needs to be done to facilitate that. Now it's become even more important. But let me give you 3 examples of what we are doing beyond what we are doing at the country level, what we are doing at the global level. Regarding collective action, we are accelerating the implementation of the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatments. This is an important tool for collective action to help those countries that are now highly indebted and don't have much room to act. And we are basically helping with rapid debt restructurings. We are also providing medium-term reductions in unsustainable debt burdens, and we are also promoting better debt management practices. That's one. But secondly, we have also prioritized a short-term crisis response with significant financial support to Ukraine, to countries that are now receiving the refugees from Ukraine, as well as the whole developing world that's suffering from the food and energy price increases. And thirdly, over the coming weeks, the World Bank Board will also consider a broader 15-month crisis response to support developing countries, in particular the poor and vulnerable in these countries, to survive the tough times. Let me stop there. Terima kasih banyak, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have later on. Thank you.
Ya, terima kasih Ibu Satu Kakonen. I think one of the I think key message is the one that really I think resonate to the audience here in Indonesia is how to, how do we need to, should we always keep open trade regime, since one of the policies from Indonesian government in the last few months has been restricting export on commodities, and the last one is on CPO. And the impact of that is really worrying. Let's move on from macroeconomic to microeconomic. We have David Fernando Audi, operating partner of East Ventures. Maybe will give us a different take on the recovery after the aftermath of the pandemic. The floor is yours, Pak David.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't prepare a slide today, so I'm just gonna give a few words and our insight, what happened during the pandemic and the post-pandemic. Before going to that, let me introduce you that East Ventures is a sector-agnostic venture capital. We are based in Indonesia and Singapore, and since we are sector-agnostic, we are open to any kind of digital solution or technology company in any technology sector. What we believe is how the investment towards this technology startup should address social issues and create positive impact to the betterment of the society. And we have so far invested in more than 200 companies with a total asset under management of 1.2 billion and with a follow-on funding about $6 billion. We invest in almost all the unicorns in Indonesia, because Indonesia we call it the home of the unicorn. We have 270 million people. Indonesia is the most populated country in Southeast Asia. It's difficult to grow a unicorn in Singapore, right? With only like 4 or 5 million population, but Indonesia is very natural. So we see the tech sector as very promising. And this is the chance of Indonesia not to miss it, because we probably can say that from the economy that is based on commodity, we pretty much didn't maximize when it comes to the industrial revolution, and then also when it comes to service, when we see country like Singapore or Hong Kong, they're probably more benefited by it, but not with technology, because technology is all about usage, about traffic, and with 270 million people, can you imagine amount of data and traffic that can be generated? And if we talk that data is the new oil, then this is the data, the new oil of Indonesia is technology. So among the unicorn that we invest, perhaps that the one that are familiar with you here, ladies and gentlemen, are a company like Gojek, Traveloka, Grab, Tokopedia, Sociola, Karo. We invest in all those companies. And in the next few years, there's going to be more unicorn as well, a lot from our portfolio as well. So with more than a decade of experience as an investor in Indonesia, East Ventures has witnessed hundreds of entrepreneurs who work hard and leverage on their skills and knowledge to change the direction of the Indonesian economy with technology. And for every new startup that they build, every new product that they introduce, and every new talent that they recruit, our startup founders are taking us one step further towards the golden era of Indonesian digital economy. And we have been working alongside these entrepreneurs to build Indonesia digital ecosystem from ground up, since 12 years ago, and spotting opportunities early. And we are the first venture capital to support Indonesia 2 homegrown unicorn, which is Tokopedia and Traveloka. Just a fun fact, we were the first investor in Tokopedia, and Tokopedia also is our first investment. So both East Ventures and Tokopedia are first time, a love from first sight. So we continue to be committed to investing in the potential of young entrepreneurs in Indonesia because they should have the opportunity to pursue their dreams and develop their skills for the nations. This is how we position our role to help support the economic recovery in the aftermath of the pandemic. So we will continue to bring more meaningful impact involving all the relevant stakeholders to achieve a more inclusive and sustainable future for Indonesia. And as Indonesia navigates and comes to terms with the post-pandemic era, rising digital adoption have pushed for advances in many sectors of the ecosystem. And during this time, thanks to the continued support of all the relevant stakeholders, Indonesia amongst the fastest growing digital economies in Southeast Asia. And we believe the strong initiative made by the relevant stakeholders, including most importantly, the government, in promoting the digitalization through G20 presidency. This will further elevate the tech ecosystem and create an even greater investment opportunities in Indonesia. Thank you very much. I'm David Audi from East Ventures.
Thank you, Pak David. It's a very upbeat and promising assessment of what's to come. And I think in the next session, I'd like to connect this macroeconomic overview and the microeconomic opportunities and how can we, connect the dots and see inspiring stories that can be seen from another perspective. We have last but not least, Pak Firman from Pemerintah Kota Makassar. Then we will have him explaining inspiring stories from Makassar. Pak Firman Hamid Pagara is the head of Regional Revenue Department in the city of Makassar. So we'll have a complete overview of the recovery after the pandemic from the global level to the city level. Silakan, Pak.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all distinguished guests. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Firman Hamid Pagara. Currently, I'm working as a head of Regional Revenue Department in Makassar. First of all, I would like to apologize because Mayor of Makassar could not attend the bilateral forum today due to there is a big convention, Bugis Makassar Merchant, and also held in Makassar at the same time. Okay, let me explain on what Makassar has done within a year in handling pandemic. Okay. After a week, Mayor of Makassar inaugurated in last February 2021. In 5th of March 2021, Makassar Recover is launched. Makassar Recover itself is an acronym of Smart Emergency Protocol Against COVID-19 and Services. Makassar Recover is multi-innovation with fully public engagement. Next, we have like 3 ecosystems in Makassar Recover, consists of health immunity, second is social adaptation, and third is economic recovery. Health immunity itself includes screening, testing, triage, digital tracking, public report. Let me explain let me tell one story. Before Peduli Lindungi is used in common, Makassar Recover itself has a tagline which is called Peduliki Salamaki. If you care, you'll be safe. This is our tagline before the Peduli Lindungi is being common use in mid of 2021. And also in health immunity, we hope that we will get a population immunity by increasing a herd immunity. Next, social adaptation. Social adaptation, there are several things include campaign, teaching, training, entry and exit protocol, event protocol, trading protocol, border protocol, and obey index protocol. The aim of this social adaptation is to adopt community with several limitations, which is written in Mayor Decree and Makassar Regulation. Third, we have economic recovery. That's what we discussed today. How Makassar will survive in aftermath pandemic. in economic recovery, if we look very clearly, it consists of hybrid in economy. Hybrid in economy, it means that Makassar will be providing more online shopping, like I explained with Mr. David, the startup will be providing more online shopping than offline. In Makassar, we have program that there is one program that stimulates small and medium enterprises by creating 1,000 startup in LOS. LOS is lorong atau gang, Pak. After that, Makassar also has like Ojol Day. What is Ojol Day? Ojol Day means in 1 week, there is 1 day where all the employees in Makassar government should use transportation online system. This is to increase the payment of like online transportation like Gojek and Grab and etc. Furthermore, the last one in Makassar will be built an office which is called Marfek, Makassar Virtual Economic Center. Marfek aims to generate all the system of hybrid economy. Products that made by small and medium enterprises will be collected by Marfek and then will be distributed to every startup in Makassar. And also Marfek will evaluate and monitor all the processes from the beginning till the end. Next, as we can see from the dashboard, it is hoped that in the end of the pandemic, that we don't see at the end of the pandemic, but we show that our health is getting healthier. The patient will be less and the survivor will be create more herd immunity. Along that, there also in the bottom, there's like a call center, 112, Makassar Home Care, Makassar Telemedicine, and Lansia Care. Furthermore, there are some innovations in Makassar Recover, which are, first is Satgas COVID Hunter. What is Satgas COVID Hunter? Satgas COVID Hunter, their duty is to test, to treatment 153 sub-district in Makassar, and also tax with targeting the place of residence where the workplace there gathers from where the suspect COVID-19 cases found. Second, Satgas Detector. This to detect daily basis of health periodically in community. 5,000 ward, 5,000 RT, 3,000 houses, and 1.5 million residents. Next, we have Satgas Reika. It means like crowd breaker. It's to reduce or minimize the crowd or in shopping mall, cafe, show entertainment, and all gathering show. If the owner is breaking the law, the Satgas Reika will take their chair and table temporarily, and the owner should read some like a statement that they will abide the protocol. Next innovation is integrated floating isolation for OTG COVID-19. Makassar government cooperate with PT Pelni with the support of the Ministry of Transportation, and we use kapal Umsini boat. The floating isolation was held in 2nd August till the late of August. As we can see from the picture, the top right, during the isolation activities on the ship, there are several activities, including gyms, fishing, and several other like sunbathing and exercising. Next, we have drone medic. There are several drones community in Makassar that Makassar should collaborate. Via drone, a group of people delivered like a medicine or vitamins to those who were self-isolating at home. Why we do that? Because several transportation online do not want to send their food or medicine to the people who get COVID-19. That's why we get a drone medic to deliver some medicine, vitamins, or food. Recover center. We have 153 recover center within 153 ward atau kelurahan di Kota Makassar. Jadi recover center ini is aimed to help community to gain public health service and also a place or venue to health vaccination or immunization. Next, innovation is swap on the road. Collaborate with national army, police and national army to swap people in local area randomly. Next, we have like Tratsar juice. Tratsar juice is made by noni fruit, and it proved increase some immunity for some people. Next, we have like barcoding household. Barcoding household is we stick a sticker in house. This aim for Satgas detector to identify if there is any suspect in the household and to identify if they receive like what is called bantuan sosial. Next, we have Makassar Recover Command Center, where the Satgas COVID can monitor every recover center in 153 ward. This is some in news in international that floating isolation integration. Eventually, all the innovations in Makassar Recover lead to decreasing number in suspect COVID-19. The economic growth is also increasing. From like last year, we have like minus 1.27%, but this year we have 4.47% in economic growth. This proves that Makassar survived in a ragtag after pandemic. Humbly thank you for having Makassar in this forum and wish you all a very good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Firman. So it's really a mixed picture in my opinion, because in one hand we see this optimistic and hope from the private sector, and the story from Makassar also shows how innovation and digital really transform the public service, how they serve their citizen. But on the other hand, this uncertainty on the global level, the war in Ukraine, the high inflation, and I think Ibu Satu mentioned how the pandemic has become the great unequalizer, give us a pessimistic view on what will happen next. I like to ask this to Ambassador Kim first. How should we then see this situation?
Thank you very much. I mean, I think you're right that the picture is mixed and complicated. On the one side, I think there is good reason to be optimistic because we have all learned some very important lessons, and I think we will be better prepared for the next pandemic or a surge of COVID-19 again. There's some huge challenges as well, but that's why I think we need to focus on all of the key points that my co-speakers highlighted. Just we have to focus on climate because the crisis is not going away, and for sustained economic prosperity, we're going to have to do the right things, make tough choices on climate. Digital economy, as both of the last speakers highlighted, is the future, not just for Indonesia, for the broader region. And so I think how governments and the private sector deals with challenges associated with the digital sector will also be critically important to achieving the kind of sustained recovery that we all want. And just last comment, I do think Indonesia's presidency of the G20 provides a tremendous opportunity for Indonesia, but also its G20 partners. And President Jokowi has rightly prioritized the key sectors that are necessary for global recovery from the pandemic, including health, digital, and energy as well. So I hope we can all work together to make sure that those priorities are met, that we actually achieve the kind of progress that's necessary for all of us.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ibu Ina, do you want to give your take on the mix overview, optimism versus pessimism?
Well, my take would also be that the glass is half full. Of course, all our economies and societies have had enormous losses and costs. At the same time, we have also been through transformative processes. We have learned to become more nimble, more flexible, maybe more resilient. We have at least I can say for a society in Germany that loves having a plan and long lead times and doing everything in peace and quiet. Now we had to act fast, we had to improvise, and we discovered that this can actually be done, and that probably it can be done still better, but at least it's a new thinking for us. I think one of the issues we have discovered in the pandemic, and then also with the Ukraine situation, is that it's not a good idea to have all your supply chains depending on one or very few sources. I don't think the answer is that everybody should produce everything at home. That would be completely inefficient and, as has been said by colleagues, not be feasible or sustainable. But maybe diversification would be a reasonable approach to take. Another issue, of course, is solidarity, that no one is safe until everybody is safe. As the UN Secretary General said, I think we should not forget this as the pandemic is still raging. We have all given lots of vaccination donations also to Indonesia. And I think this is no longer needed because now world supply is good, but we should not forget this general point. And I think we also need a global concept to deal with the food insecurity, with the energy insecurity that has happened globally. And this is something we really have to address because it's having repercussions, as Satu pointed out, from the experience of 2011, really worldwide into poorer communities. So those would be some points that would be my takeaway.
Thank you, Buina. Bu Satu, you mentioned in your last slide a few policy recommendations. How important is that policies in terms of determining what will happen next? Because in Indonesia, we've seen after the Idul Fitri, for instance, this is one of the, I think, the biggest homecoming or mudik in Indonesia. Not, I think, since 2019 when we have it the last time, 170,000 cars were passing the toll roads. So the mood is optimistic, the public mood is optimistic. But how important policy from the government affect that mood?
Thank you. And I didn't talk about Indonesia specifically in my presentation, and I think this is a good time then to say a few words about Indonesia, because even though the global picture is quite challenging, and we have a lot of countries in the world that are going through very rough times, Indonesia is actually bucking that trend. So I have to commend the Indonesian economic policy authorities. They have done a good job on the fiscal policy and the monetary policy to basically to balance the response to the pandemic. They didn't went overboard with the extraordinary support during the time of the pandemic. And as a result of that, Indonesia is one of the very few countries in the world, emerging economies. I mean, developed countries are in a different league. But of the emerging economies, Indonesia is one of the very few ones that still have some fiscal space left, that still have some monetary policy space left. And it's basically telling us that the pandemic was economically managed very well. Also, on the debt side, the public debt levels, yes, they increased, but they are nowhere close to the danger zone. So again, my hat off to the Ministry of Finance, to the Bank of Indonesia for the job very well done. And I think it's important to highlight that. Now, going forward, I mean, there are uncertainties also for Indonesia. But Indonesia is also the only country in East Asia that actually started taking quite significant reforms during the pandemic times. And that was very brave from the policymakers. First of all, the omnibus law for job creation that opened the space for private investment was a very significant historic step forward. Doing a tax reform in the middle of the pandemic, very few countries would have nerve to do that. And very few countries would have a nerve to do an intergovernmental fiscal transfer reform also during the pandemic. So again, I mean, these are examples of 3 big reforms that will be helping the economic recovery in Indonesia going forward. Is that enough? Nope. There is a need to continue still reforms. And I completely agree with Ambassador Kim, is that some of the areas, basically using this opportunity to build back better, going for green, going for sustainability. This is the big opportunity for Indonesia. And I do hope that that's going to be the next step where Indonesia is going. But I wanted to say that yes, there is overall very uncertain global outlook. But Indonesia is doing better than most other countries within this very, very challenging outlook. But we have to be careful because the impacts of the war in Ukraine have not been yet fully seen. So we will only see over time, how difficult the situation will become.
Thank you, Ambassador. Pak David, what's your take?
About whether optimist or not?
Yeah, we listened to the global overview.
Yeah, actually, we are very optimist. In fact, we are that optimist that we don't talk about the pandemic anymore. Like with our portfolio companies, when we discuss about strategy, we think the pandemic already passed. I mean, of course, we still give regard to safety protocols and all of this and that. But if we keep on contemplating, this is what we say to company that we invest. If we keep on contemplating about whether the pandemic there's going to be another like 3rd, 4th, 5th wave, you're gonna be left out. Because like all of the other businessmen, they already proceed with full-scale expansion. In fact, that is why we see there's a surge in inflation and so on. There will always be challenges, right, in business. Like before, the challenges is of course how to deal with the pandemic. Now the challenges is not the pandemic. Now the challenges is how to deal with the supply chain disruption, with the pent-up demand, with the inflation that happens in United States and Fed start to increase their rate and also reduce their balance sheet, and that's having an impact on the emerging market, especially in Indonesia, where we have to be careful so that we don't see our IDR depreciate. Because as long as the IDR is strong, I think we can shield the impact of the Fed tightening. Yeah, as long as IDR is strong. So this is one parameter that we watch. Yeah, and so the challenges now is about this: how to anticipate what's going to happen. Because the era of free money, the era of cheap money is no longer there. The era of high-flying valuation is no longer there. It's now about the path to profitability, how to basically minimize your cash burn, and how to spend more wisely, more prudently. Yeah, because to do another funding round will not be as easy as before. Yeah, for all these tech company. So we just have to be prudent. Yeah, but at the same time, those who are sitting with cash on their balance sheet, for example, like there's a couple of tech company that they are lucky to close their funding round before all of this happened. So they're sitting with cash, and we advise them to be, to also take opportunity, maybe like acquisitions, because definitely there's going to be consolidation. There's probably going to be other tech company that may not have the opportunity to close the funding round, and then this already happened, right? So this can lead to consolidation, and they can be a little bit of opportunistic to basically acquire some stake in the company to strengthen their business, but they also have to be prudent. Yeah, they have to be prudent when spending cash, because like I said before, to do another funding round will take some time. Yeah, maybe another like 3-6 months. We don't know yet. We still see what is happening, and we take a lot of clue from what happened in United States, because whatever they do is always having an impact in the financial market, and including in the private capital market as well in Indonesia. Thanks.
East Ventures has been looking at opportunities at city level governments, right? You just released a survey on digital readiness. Before I go to Pak Firman.
Yeah. So as part of our ESG initiative and our contribution to the Indonesian digital economy, every year we did this research. It's called EV digital competitiveness index. So what we did is that we measure multiple parameters from data from the government, from BPS, from statistic, and also through various survey with the local government, from the official local government, also the local businessmen, the local startup. So we compile like a 200-page report every year that measure the digital competitiveness of each province of the total 34 province. Yeah, so sometimes it's similar to the World Digital Competitiveness Index, but this is like Indonesian Digital Competitiveness Index, where we map out all the digital, why this province digital competitiveness is up, why this province is not rise as fast as this province. So we map it all out and we publish this report for free in our website. So we distribute, anybody can download it, like the local government can use it as a reference. Also the tech startup and any businessman that want to do business in any province, they can just read this report and become a good reference for them to do for their decision making.
Thank you, Pak David. Pak Firman, how do you think Makassar fare in that survey?
To my opinion, I would say like Makassar city and also like several city government in Indonesia is lead to like a good economic growth. As we can see in Makassar also we have like a big increasing like minus 1.27 to 4.47 this year. And also I have seen that several cities also having the same trend. So the challenge here that every city government should aware the rate of vaccination in all community. In Makassar we have like above 95 maybe 95% of all people have already vaccinated. So this is all the challenge for all the city government in Indonesia. So after that, after all communities having a vaccination or booster, or we will be like can do several things that were not allowed that we done in 22 years in the past. So I hope that the challenges is here like obey the safety and healthy protocol, more vaccinated for all the people that haven't get vaccine, and be more creative, collaborative, or all the city of government and innovative. So we in the end we all can survive from this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Firman. Well, it's really fascinating discussion, but we are limited by time. It's almost 3 p.m. But I promised I invite one question maybe from the floor if you have one. If not, then let's have one very quick one sentence, maybe closing remarks from all of our distinguished speakers, starting from Ambassador Kim. Your last key point message, maybe.
I just want to thank Tempo for inviting me to this important forum. I do remain optimistic about future prospects for all the reasons we discussed, and look forward to working with Indonesia and other partners to achieve that progress.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Lebo?
Well, make the best of disruption, recover green and sustainable.
Thank you. Ibu, satu.
Okay, I'm bullish on Indonesia, and we are projecting 5.1% growth for 2022. So I think that tells you everything. So but we are realistic. We see how the global situation is, but Indonesia, yes, we are optimistic.
Thank you, Pak David.
I'm also very bullish for Indonesia. The GDP projection I'm very convinced that we will continue to grow despite what happened currently, the turmoil in the global financial market that also impacted to Indonesia, but the long-term story of Indonesia remain intact. And as an investors, we are committed to continue to invest in the Indonesian market. Thank you.
Thank you. Pak Firman, last but not least.
Short one. In Makassar, we have Makassar recover. In G20, we have recover together, recover stronger. Thank you.
Thank you. So inspired by Makassar, and thank you so much for very eye-opening and comprehensive remarks from all of you. A big round of applause to all of our speakers. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'm closing the session. Thank you so much. Selamat siang.
Discussion, and thank you so much for all the panelists that already give us their opinions and insights about economic recovery in aftermath of the pandemic. And we hope that in the future there will be a collaboration maybe between government of Indonesia, Germany, and the United States of America in terms to ensure economic and also financial stability for each country. And I'm very happy to hear that there is a one big capital venture like is Venture, which actually is also one of our sponsors that is have a strong belief with the unicorn in Indonesia, which have much potential to grow. And once again, thank you so much for all the panelists in this session too.